Ever since I was a child, I've heard stories about Cuba. Mystical, but off limits. My dad always told me, make your own decisions and question everything. In 1996, I was working as a photographer in Cancun when I was offered a job at a resort in Cuba. The artist inside me was dying to go, but I didn't. Many nights I would sit on the beach and look out over the ocean, imagining what the people in Havana were doing. Images poured through my mind: historic Havana, the famous Malecon boardwalk, the vintage cars. I could picture the softened streetlights, hazy from the humidity. Ah, Havana. I could see myself there. Only a fellow traveler would understand the desire to explore new, exciting places. December of 2016, we set our sights on Cuba for the adventure of a lifetime that would change our lives forever. This is my experience. We arrived in Cuba the evening of December 14th, 2016, only a week after President Obama had lifted the travel ban. It felt good to walk through the airport without any worries. The lady in customs asked me if I wanted my passport stamped. As a proud world traveler, I said yes. Since we were staying at an Airbnb, the owner sent her driver. Javier waved us down in his mean green machine. I tried taking pictures out the window, but the bumpy streets didn't allow it. Then I looked down and noticed no seatbelts. Yikes. Oh well, when in Havana, we were greeted at the apartment by the housekeepers, Amparo and her husband, Noel. They were warm and welcoming, and the space was huge, very modern. Since it was late, we dined at the only place that was open, a nearby Italian restaurant. We invited Amparo and Noel to be our guests and thought this was the perfect time to get to know each other better. We found out very quickly there are two types of restaurants in Cuba: government-owned, for blue-collar workers, and privately owned, they call paladares, for white-collar. This restaurant was definitely private. Despite the raised eyebrows of the owner, we didn't want anything to spoil our special evening with our new Cuban friends. This was our first night in Cuba, and after all these years, I couldn't believe we were finally here. We were awakened by the intoxicating smell of Cuban coffee. If that's not enough to get you out of bed in the morning, I'm not sure what is. Amparo had prepared a delicious breakfast for us, complete with tropical fruit, eggs, and the best darn coffee I've ever had. Our driver, Javier, was our tour guide for the day. We stayed in the neighborhood of Miramar, known for its salsa clubs, which is about 15 minutes from the downtown. First order of business, get tickets for the hottest show in town, the famous Cabaret Show at the Parisian, inside of the National Hotel. Javier dropped us by the Capitol, and we walked from there. I'm fascinated by history and was eager to explore the streets of old Havana. As I wandered down the streets in awe, I felt like I was representing the United States, since the travel ban had just lifted, and I was one of the first Americans to interact with the locals. Basically, I didn't want anyone thinking I was being disrespectful by shoving a camera in their face. Wow, so much to see and do. You'd need a month or more just to skim the surface of this 280 square mile colonial city. But that's okay, we're planning on going back. We hit a government-owned restaurant for lunch. $6 will get you a tasty plate of fish, 2 sides, a beverage, and yes, even dessert. Of course, we got a round of mojitos. Fantastic. After 10 hours of walking in 85-degree weather, with about 100% humidity, we decided to call it a night. After all, we had to refuel for the next day's adventure. From an artist's point of view, Havana, Cuba is one of the most magical and inspirational cities I've ever had the pleasure of visiting. There are classic cars on every street, unique people from all over the world, and live music at every bar. And where else can you get a handcrafted mojito for about $1.50? We were thrilled to attend the famous Cabaret Show that night. Word on the street told us it was the best show in town. This vintage club reminded me of the one in the movie The Mask. I was expecting people to come out in zoot suits. To our surprise, we got lucky and were seated at the very first table in the front. Several of the dancers were hamming it up for the camera and even swung by to sing to us. The dancers were hot and the mojitos were cold. What can I say? The place was jumpin'. This glitzy joint reflected a romantic nostalgia from Cuba's past in its heyday, when the customers were Al Capone, Frank Sinatra, and Marilyn Monroe. Havana was then what Vegas has become. Havana was sexy, but obviously, it still is. So enjoy the show.
We are downtown. There's so many squares down here. I don't even know where we are right now. It's like spider webs. You walk out of one, you walk into another. It's kind of like being in Venice. Every street looks alike.
We took a city bus to downtown Havana. The best tips are from locals, and what better way to get advice is to mingle with the locals. The adorable kids coming out of school were more than willing to pose for the camera. I never got sick of gazing at those beautiful classic cars. I almost walked off a curb a couple of times from looking up at the mind-blowing buildings. It's absolutely an artist's paradise. The street vendors were kind and considerate. The laws don't permit vendors to approach tourists, so window shopping was very laid back. We got a hot tip on a dinner show called the Buena Vista Social Club. We thought it was just musicians, but to our surprise, it was a full cabaret show. This talented group was spectacular. They even took members of the audience up on stage. We had so much fun, I didn't want the evening to end. We started out our day early for our 2-hour drive to the beach with new amigos, George and Claudia. George was more than our driver, he was our tour guide. As we sailed down the highway in search of adventure in George's '57 Plymouth, he tipped us off on a local hotspot for the best homemade pina coladas. Bacunayagua was perched on top of a mountain overlooking the ocean and a 400-foot arch bridge. Spectacular views, gracious servers, and an all-inclusive bar. That's right, you pay for one drink and they leave the bottle out, so you can refill as many times as your heart desires. Havana Club rum, of course. We had a couple and hit the road. We made it to the beach town of Varadero by mid-afternoon, just enough time to take in a few hours of sun. The beach was amazing, and even provided mini palapas for shade, as well as a beachside massage. Now we're talking. The sand was like powdered sugar, and the glistening turquoise water about 85 degrees. This was total and complete heaven. The foundation of this shimmering beach town was established in 1887, but now over 2 million tourists gravitate here each year. It's a welcoming place with warm people, relaxed streets, and a safe surrounding. paradise. Varadero also offers scuba diving, deep-sea fishing, parasailing, and surfing. Like the postcard says, wish you were here in this Garden of Eden. Today we made the journey to the mountain village of Vinales. George and his wife Claudia offered to drive us again and were excited to show us the sights. We were equally happy that they were driving us. We had a blast with them last time. The mountains around Vinales are called mogates, or haystacks. The jungle looked like a scene out of King Kong, where they landed on Skull Island, and for a second, I almost thought I had seen a giant footprint. We stopped by a nearby farm to buy honey. Delish. The locals were welcoming and anxious to talk to us. Viva, Cuba. George had selected a cozy mountain restaurant for a traditional Cuban lunch, including black beans with cilantro, grilled plantains, and fresh yuca, accompanied by a cold mojito, of course. We pulled into a picturesque tobacco farm and took a quick tour, even learned how to roll our own cigars. The scent of the leaves were intoxicating. We were fortunate enough to catch the sunset that evening. Wow! As the sun sank deeper into the horizon, we stood on top of the Escambre mountain range and just took it all in. What a day! Since we only had one night left in Cuba, we decided to hit the hottest ticket in town, the Cuban Art Factory, or Fábrica de Arte. This early 1900s factory now features an art gallery, restaurants, bars, and live music on 6 stages. This 19,000 square foot super club is home to some of the most talented musicians in all of Cuba. I was so honored to be part of this progressive scene in La Habana, Cuba, and delighted to see real progress happening after all these years. Our last day, very bittersweet. Sweet because we were on vacation and had met amazing new friends. Bitter because I was not ready to go back yet. It was so sad to think about leaving so soon. I'll be honest, my idea of a vacation is at least a month. Like a kid in a candy store, I could not get enough of this town. I kept secretly hoping that our flight would be canceled and we'd get to stay another day. After walking most of the afternoon, we came upon the famous Floridita Bar and Restaurant, old stomping ground to Ernest Hemingway. We decided to cool our heels inside with one of their famous daiquiris. The restaurant was complete with live music, air conditioning, and an incredibly friendly staff. Salud! I had closed my eyes for an instant and could picture what majestic Havana looked like back in its glory days. It must have been sensational. I heard Havana used to be the Paris of the Caribbean back in the 50s. Well, as I looked around, nothing had changed. Havana is so embedded with culture. There were galleries on every street, live music in every bar. You couldn't avoid it once it grabbed a hold of you. And why would you want to? It was an honor to have experienced her rhythms. La Habana is still frozen in time. Our journey wouldn't have been complete without a classic convertible tour through the city. Our driver, who looked like Telly Savalas, suggested the famous Hamilton Street for all of its artist renderings. Unbelievable. Another hidden gem. We stopped to chew the fat with a few vendors. The people, humble, gracious, and respectful. I didn't feel any pressure or danger. A group of kids playing soccer strolled over and were simply curious to find out about us. They asked where we were from and why we were here. With goosebumps and tears in my eyes, I told them all the same thing. I've been wanting to experience Cuba for over 20 years, and I finally made it. Viva Cuba!
Viva Cuba!
Viva Cuba!
Viva Cuba!
Viva Cuba!
Viva Cuba.
Viva Cuba!
Cómo camina y cómo vacila esa negra. Mira que te digo bailando en la esquina. Camina, camina ya, la mujer de Antonio. Del centro a Habana dicen que fue para el malecón. Mira y allí mismo se formó el rumbón. Camina, camina ya, la mujer de Antonio. Dale, 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 dale a los pedales, que esa negrita sí vale. Camina, camina ya, la mujer de Antonio. Y al ánimo te juro que la fuente se rompió cuando la mujer de Antonio pasó. Bueno, caballero, dicen que en el malecón se formó tremenda pelotera, porque la mujer de Antonio se quitó la ropa y se quedó tanquita. Y la gente de Songo 21 le sacó un corito que dice así: dale. Hay que ver cómo camina esa mujer, cómo mueve la cintura.